Welcome back for lesson 2 of Affinity Designer. So on our last episode we looked at shapes and we looked at our environment and the layout. Now we're going to expand on that. So for the first part of this tutorial, what I want you to do is create 3 shapes. I want a triangle, I want a square, and I want a circle. And I'd like them all to be at 70 millimeters. Begin. Okay, so here are my 3 shapes. Now they're very faint at the moment, so the way we can deal with that is if we simply highlight them, we can either do it one by one, or we can press Shift and select them all one by one. Or the alternative was simply to click and drag a box to select them and then let go. So we can also see on our layers they are all selected. Now we're going to go up on this same right hand side up to stroke. Now stroke, I mentioned before, is the thickness of our lines, so here's the width. Now my advice when playing with any of these tools is simply to take it to an extreme, because then at least you know just how sensitive or detailed a tool can be. So if we take it all the way, you'll see you get these actually quite artistic shapes. I mean, if you wanted to make a donut, I mean, there you go, perfect donut in the centre. But let's reshape them, and again, great for icons and stuff, but let's just make it that they're visible. So there we go, let's turn them to that. In fact, if we want it to be perfect, we can again click in the box and type 5 points. So remember, you can use sliders or you can always enter the specifics, and you will get familiar with what's suitable and not, depending on how often you're playing with the software. So now we've done that, we'll just unselect. And what we're going to do is we're going to introduce a bit of colour. So pick your favourite colour for each one. So if I select my square, we can go to swatches, and I'm going to make that one yellow. So if I take the next one, turn that one to green, take the next one, turn that to blue. Now we can see them. I know they're not very bold and colourful at this minute, but how did I do that? Well, it's all to do with this up here, this little icon thing. When this is selected, by simply clicking on it, as you can see, it's the outer edge of a circle. So that's saying this is basically the stroke. This is the outside of the object we're creating. It's the stroke of the object. So we can change that. So now I can darken it. And click on the object now, and then click on the dark again, because that's now in my palette. Choose the next one. We can go red. Choose the yellow. We can make that a purple. Now they're clearly more visible. Now if we wanted to get rid of that altogether, we'd click on this, basically it's saying there's nothing there, that's why the line's going through it, a bit like a no entry sign, meaning no colour. So this is our outside stroke, but if we click on this one, you'll see this has now come to the forefront, and this is basically our fill colour. So now I can choose to add yellow to my purple square. If I click on my right one, I can now bring green, and then with my dark blue one, I can make that pink. So we've introduced colour, and of course if we want to now get rid of our borders, as in literally get rid of them, we can click on that, because if there's no colour they don't exist. Oh, wrong way. So that's how we get rid of that. And again, how do I undo this? Well, I can either go down to my history tab down the bottom and select the previous one, or of course I could have pressed Ctrl and Z. So be sure that we want to get rid of our outside border. Click on that, and then we can click on the basically clear it. And of course, if I wanted, I can highlight the other two together. Make sure I've got this highlighted, as in it's my border, my stroke I'm getting rid of, and then just clear it. And there we are. So now we've just got solid objects. Now I'll just quickly make these more visible so that you can. Let's just make sure we're doing this right. So we're going to change that into a more visible colour on the screen. Even the green, we'll just make that again better to work with. So the next thing we're going to look at is we're going to now start looking at our intersections with our layers, how they interact together. So we know at the moment that if I was to rearrange these based on what we see on the screen, our triangle will be on the top, our ellipse will be sandwiched in the middle, and our rectangle at the bottom. So let's just test it. I'm going to bring that over there, I'm going to move that one to there. And clearly we can see the order. Triangles at the top, followed by the circle, followed by the square. But let's flip it the other way around. So I'm going to click on my triangle. As I say, my advice is click here slightly to the left of the icon, drag it to the bottom, and then that one we're going to drag down a layer below. You can see it highlights. There we are. So we've changed the order. Well, of course, the other way we can do it is simply to click on that triangle, and then we can move it to the top of the stack. And then the triangle, we can move that to the bottom of the stack. And there we are. So that shows how they are interacting with regards to being layers. But what else can we do with it? Well, that's what these tools are for here. So if we are to add, so let's take this out of the way for the moment. In fact, what we'll do is we'll hide that layer by simply turning it off there with a little checkbox. So now I've got these, we can see what this does. So this is saying add. And what that's going to do is it's going to take the circle and the square as they are and add them. So it might be I'm trying to make something that's got this kind of shape with a sort of triangle edge to it. Well, I can make a circle and a square and combine them simply by clicking that. Highlight the two, click that. Now I've created a whole new object. And of course that object I can manipulate. Now we haven't looked at this yet, but if I click on this little handlebar here, it allows me to turn it. So now I can almost make a kind of keyhole or a character for a logo. If I press shift, it'll lock on small axes of basically I think it's 5 degrees or 15-degree turns. So that helps you lock in place. So that's one thing we can do. Control Z to get us back. There we are. So the other thing we can do though is we have other options here. So if I highlight both of them again, I can subtract. So that has subtracted that from that one. And of course it is dependent on the layers. Control Z. If I was to change them layers around now, basically put the circle beneath the rectangle and then hit that same button again, having highlighted both of them. Now it's that way around. I've made a Pac-Man equivalent. So we're basically dissecting at that point, taking something out. Now it might be that what we actually want to do is we want to keep the circle and keep the square, but take the interaction where they actually overlap. We want to take that section out. So again, highlight them, and that's what this tool does. I mean, you can see the icon does give you an intersect. For actually, I think it's going to do just that. It's going to keep the intersection on this one. Therefore, that's all we keep. And if I Control Z that. And the next option, of course, is to do the opposite, which is XOR, which means we're going to get rid of the intersection part. Like that. So again, that's become one whole new solid object. And the last one is it's going to break all of the sections into sections. What does that mean? That means now that is separate from that, which is separate from that. And you'll see it's created new layers over here. And of course now we can just recolor them if we choose to. So again, can be used in an artistic way, but there are times you're going to want to do that. So that shows our intersections and also our layers, the fact we can move our layers up and down. We can manipulate to create new shapes. So again, another example could be, if I simply get rid of all of them now, let's assume we wanted to make a face. So we might take an ellipse tool, and then we're going to do another little ellipse to make an eye, and another eye. Okay, now we can't see them, so I'm just going to quickly select them over in my layers, and I'm going to change the colour. Let's turn them to grey for now. So now I should be able to simply take them out. Well, that left me with my eyes. Do the other way around. There we are. Now when I say take them out, I mean we've actually taken them out. If I was now put the triangle back on, here we are. Watch what happens as we go over. See, we've literally cut out holes, we've made a mask. So that's a perfect example of where you might want to do just that. You've got a shape and you actually want to have holes in that layer. And remember, it is a layer. So that's how we do that. So you see, it is useful, but it's important we get to learn the concept of our shapes. Now also, when I made my shapes, I did actually come down to the transform tool and I actually set my sizes and I locked them. So again, even with our newfound shape, what I can do is the height is what I want to match a triangle. So in there, I'll type 70. And hey presto, this now matches. So this is our working with shapes. And that concludes our working with shapes effectively. But we are going to look at how we can change colour. Now, one of the things is, as we've just talked about, solid colours are simple. We can choose whether we want a fill colour to be a particular colour that we're looking at, or we can change our stroke colour by clicking on that aspect there and then picking an outside border colour. If we go to stroke, we can change the thickness of that, make it accordingly. But there are some other options available to us. The first important option is with regards to our colours. So at the moment we've been using swatches, but if we click on actual colour on the colour tab itself, we get the colour triangle. Now what this allows us to do is, we're here now and we can simply slide around to choose a colour. So let's say I'm going for some sort of teal. Well, let's say that's the teal I'm looking for. In fact, let's do this to the triangle. So I'm going to click on the full colour there and click on teal there. There we are. So greeny blue, this is always subjective. But let's say we're going for that shade. Well, now what we can do is by clicking on the inner triangle, we can actually either lighten it almost to nothing, or we can darken it to black, or we can find somewhere in between. But the point is we're playing with the shade tones within that particular colour. So you could say you're kind of playing with its own hue, its own intensity. So that way you can almost get every perfect colour you want. And in fact, you'll find that just here it's referring to the HSL. The H is the hue, the saturation, and the luminescence, how light it is. The hue is to do with the colour shade, and saturation is whether it's more mono, as in less colour, or saturated, meaning more colour. Now the other alternatives we've got though is to introduce fills, as in fountain kind of fills. So let me just get rid of all of that and demonstrate. If I put a rectangle on the screen, we're going to take off our border, we don't want that, and we'll just center it to the page using our centering tools. Now we're going to come down here. This is so on our tools tab we want the fill tool. By default it's going to be a solid colour, which is effectively what we're already on anyway. So when we simply click on a colour, that's what we're playing with, solid colour. But we have other options, and the one I want to look at, because the others are very similar, is we're going to look at the linear. So when we go linear, you'll see we've got a point here and a point there. They don't have to be there though. So for example, I can take that up to the top corner, I can drag this one to the bottom corner, or I could simply put it anywhere on the page. But we'll go corner to corner. Now that's highlighted, I can click on my colour tab here in the middle of the tool. We have the blue. So if I click, this is showing our full fountain as it stands at the minute. It's called a fountain fill because basically it's going to vary in its shade. So if I click on this end, the colour that's selected in this box here is the colour we're going to change. So if I click on that, let's go red. And again, because we're in a colour wheel, we can choose what kind of red. So let's lighten it. Yeah, I like that. And then we have our blue, which again, I like that. But if we wanted, we can add more. So if I double click anywhere on this line, effectively I've added another point. Now before I add a new colour to that point, you'll notice there's a line in the middle there and a line in the middle there, and there was one previously here. That allows us to move our centre point, so we can move it more red towards that direction or more blue towards that direction. So let's put that back in the center. For this one here now, I might decide I want some orange. So I'm going to click on that, come down to orange, and, well, choose my shade. There we go, something like that. And hey presto, we're now getting quite an interesting tonage, which will be great for a background. It might be we're going to put some text over this. So this is how we can get various colours in our work. But this could also be applied to a font. So we could have text. It's changing its colour tones as we move across the page. So that's how fountain fills work. But like I say, very effective for backgrounds, very useful on other shapes. Okay, so the next thing we want to look at is how we draw lines and our drawing tools. So first thing is we're going to click on our pen tool. This is great for if you have to trace an object. For example, you might have a photograph on there and you need to trace an outline of something. So let me demonstrate this. When I click on the page, I get a point. And where I go to next and click again, I'll get a straight line, and then again, and then again, and then again. And then if I join back to the last one, I create a solid object, which can also be filled. So if I click on the fill tool now, pick a colour, it's become an object. However, there are other things we can do with this tool. So if I just delete that, the other thing we can do is when we go back to our pen tool, we can almost trace out like a wave. There we are. But of course, it's very jagged, you could say. Everything's a combination of lines. So if we come up here, you'll see we have a smoothing tool. If I click on that while it's all highlighted, it will smooth the line. The other thing is, if I go back to my move tool, I can now resize the object or stretch it. Now the other thing we could do is simply make sure we're drawing curves all the time by clicking on that tool up there, which is our preservation of new curves. So now if I click, we can have handlebars which allow us to reshape our objects as we're going around the page. This takes a lot of skill, but it is useful when trying to trace out forms of text. Not to mention if you want to be really artistic, then join it back up to make one full object. So that's the pen tool, very useful on many occasions. But other tools include the pencil, and the pencil is similar to the brush, which we're going to come on to in a moment. So with the pencil though, I just want to come up to our main controls up here. So the first thing is we can choose the width. We can make it a bit thicker if we choose to. Let's go with that. Controller, we have automatic, pressure, velocity and none. So the purpose is that you can use a drawing tablet connected to your computer which has an actual stylus pen. And like an actual pencil, if you press hard it would get thicker and heavier. Well, that's exactly what happens with this, and this software allows for that. Now we also have a stabilizer, so let me demonstrate this. Let me first of all demonstrate without. So we'll take the stabilizer off. If I try and draw a nice smooth line, even though I'm using a big pen, you can see it's just, yeah, a bit of a mess. So if I just take that down a bit more, there we go. Now I'm going to do the same again, but this time I'm going to put the stabilizer on. And what the stabilizer does is it creates a drag. So, oh, it's not on. Let's try that again. Stabilizer on. There it is. Make sure it is. Now, you'll see I've got a dot with a line. And what I'm getting is a lot smoother. You can already see that. If we do a comparison, it's quite evident this is a lot smoother. But if we wanted it even smoother, we'll simply go back to our pencil. And with our stabilizer, we can increase its size. So now it's going to be longer. And you can see that's longer. Now I can get very smooth and accurate curves. as you can see. Very smooth. And that's what I would call a piece of spaghetti art. I think it's very nice. I think it'd sell very well in Wigtown. And of course, you ladies may choose to add colour to it, which will probably make yours more successful than mine. But let's look at our next option. For our next option, we're going to move to the brush tool. Now, the brush is a little bit more interesting. So before we get heavily into this, let's just choose a decent size. Let's go for 30. I'll just test that. There we are. Actually, I'm going to go a bit bigger than that. Let's go for that. Brilliant. So I'll just select all, delete them. Now, the reason I wanted to wait before we got into this is, so yes, we selected our brush, but we have different brush styles. Now, back over here, just above the layers pane in our colour wheel, we actually have brushes. Now, if I click on that, and I click on this little pull down here, acrylics, we have all sorts of options, including inks, oil paints, pencils, pens, watercolours, and many, many more. In fact, you can create your own brushes, but that's clearly not being covered in this episode. So let's choose watercolours, and already you can see the brush types have changed. If I scroll down, there's many options. So let's take this one. So when I draw across the page now, I get this effect. Now, like the other one, the pencil, what we can do is we can choose our stabilizer to be on, and we can choose its length. So if I just increase that length because I want it to be very smooth, we'll take that up. I'll also take this width down because it's quite thick. Take it down to about that. We'll delete this and start again. So now back onto my brush tool, and let's draw. There we are. We'll do some more. Almost like hair. Strands of hair being drawn. Now again, if I change the length of our stabilizer, we'll get smoother. And now if I just go back to my colour wheel, let's go sort of yellow. I'll go for some dark yellows. Now bring in some more lighter ones. And again, I might change the width, take it lower. So probably a bit of orange. And just by building up, again, what we talk about layers, I'm going to go in some sort of, well actually, no, it's not really black, let's just go for more of a darker. Let's bring in some browns, which brown, by the way, causes confusion with people, but it is an orange. There we go, so there's our fine strands all being drawn back in, just like that. And then I think what we'll do is we'll just increase the width again. Bring in some of the bigger ones. There we are. So you're doing that and you'd create your own hair, and of course if we were to select that all, we can condense it, move it, manipulate it, do whatever is required for the circumstance. So brush tool, very useful, and as I say, we can come to our brushes and select various options. I believe when we did the actual tutorials, Carol found it quite useful when doing eyebrows. So again, you may want to create a logo and paint in a feature, which is probably what we'll be looking at in the next video. So that's our drawing tools. Highly recommend you put the stabilizer on when trying to make smooth curves. And if you want straight lines, obviously the pen tool will allow you to do that. With the brush, it's just very, very useful. And you can create some really nice effects. And that concludes our lesson 2.